The morning air was thick with fog, curling around the rusted tracks and abandoned railcars like silent fingers. Locals often avoided the area, saying the place carried a strange energy, a feeling that eyes were watching even when no one was there. The rail yard had been closed for decades, a forgotten relic of the town's industrial past, but every now and then, kids daring each other to explore would vanish for hours, only to return shaken and pale. Most brushed it off as childish pranks, but that foggy morning, a single call changed everything. The tip came from a woman who sounded frantic, her voice trembling over the phone as she claimed she could hear children crying beneath the broken rail cars. At first, the dispatcher suspected a prank. The rail yard had been quiet for years, and people in the town were known for overreacting. But something about her tone, a mix of fear and urgency, made them take it seriously. Officers were dispatched, arriving to find the yard cloaked in silence, broken only by the creak of rusted metal in the wind. As the officers stepped onto the gravel, a chill ran down their spines. The air smelled of rust, wet wood, and something faintly metallic, almost like blood. Their flashlights cut through the fog, revealing toppled crates, graffiti, and the skeletal remains of once proud locomotives. It was a place that had been abandoned but not forgotten, and for some reason, it felt as though it was holding its breath, waiting. Each step they took echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the hollow spaces between the train cars. Then, just as they were about to radio in that the call had been false, they heard it, the faint sound of soft, irregular crying carried on the damp morning air. It was subtle, almost like it could be imagined, but the officers froze, listening. The sound grew, a mixture of sobbing and whispered laughter, echoing from deep within the yard. It wasn't just one voice, they were many, young voices, calling out in fear and confusion. Suddenly, the stakes were no longer about investigating an abandoned site. Something was hiding here, and it had been waiting. The first physical clues appeared as they pressed deeper into the yard. A small, tattered backpack leaned against a rusted train wheel, and a single, worn sneaker lay abandoned in the gravel. Oddly, the items were scattered in a deliberate pattern, as if someone had wanted them to be found. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. The rail yard was no longer just a forgotten relic. It had become a maze, a trap, a place where lives were being quietly hidden from the world. Every shadow seemed alive, every creaking metal panel a whisper, and the officers realized with a growing sense of dread. Whatever had been here, it was still here, waiting in the darkness. As the officers ventured further into the rail yard, the fog seemed to thicken, wrapping around their ankles like cold chains. The ground was littered with debris, broken bottles, scraps of clothing, and chunks of rotting wood, each item telling a story of neglect and decay. Every step forward felt heavier, as though the weight of decades of abandonment pressed down on them. Shadows shifted unnaturally across the rusted metal of the old train cars, making it hard to tell what was real and what was imagined. Then, from beneath a collapsed freight car, they heard it again, a faint shuffle, barely audible, but undeniably human. Officers moved cautiously toward the sound, flashlights sweeping across the cracked gravel and shattered rail ties. That's when they began to notice the first real signs of human presence. Small, scuffed shoes left haphazardly in corners, the kind that belonged to children. Torn backpacks and scattered notebooks lay half-buried in dirt and mud. It was clear that someone, or many someones, had been here recently. The precision of the placement was unnerving. It wasn't random. Whoever had been living here had an acute understanding of the yard's labyrinthine layout, leaving traces that could confuse, mislead, or even taunt any outsiders who dared to enter. Deeper in the yard, they found more disturbing evidence. Faint, chalk-like drawings on the walls of train cars, depicting stick-figure families and tiny, trembling homes. Some were scratched into the rusted metal, others scrawled in pencil on scraps of paper. A few of the drawings were marked with names that matched missing children from local reports over the past several months. The officers shared worried glances, realizing that the cries they had heard were not from stray animals or echoes of the wind. These were the voices of children, hidden and possibly trapped, their lives intertwined with the yard in ways no one had imagined. As they continued exploring, the yard seemed to grow larger, more confusing, like it had a life of its own. Twisted beams and collapsed structures formed narrow passageways, forcing the team to crouch and squeeze through, their boots slipping in puddles of stagnant water. Every creak of metal, every drip of water from the broken roofs made their hearts race. Then they noticed small piles of food, stale crackers, half-drained water bottles, and tins of preserved goods. Left behind or rationed, it was impossible to tell. Someone had been careful enough to survive here, but careless enough to leave breadcrumbs that led straight to them. Finally, the first real breakthrough came when a young officer spotted a tiny handprint on the wall of a narrow passage. It was fresh, smudged into the grime, and unmistakably human. The team froze, the sound of distant sobbing echoing once more. It was the confirmation they hadn't fully dared hope for. The children were alive, and they were close. Every instinct screamed danger, yet urgency pushed them onward. The abandoned rail yard, long thought to be silent and dead, was revealed as a hidden world, a place of fear, mystery, and secrets that had waited years to be discovered. The deeper the officers went into the rail yard, the more the place revealed its secrets. What had seemed like ordinary rusted train cars and piles of debris began to form a pattern, almost like a hidden network waiting to be discovered. Then, beneath a particularly dilapidated railcar, one of the officers noticed a loose metal panel partially hidden by dirt and broken planks. With some effort, they pried it open and revealed a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A chill ran down their spines. Whatever lay below had been concealed for years, and now it was finally coming to light. Flashlights pierced the inky blackness of the underground tunnels. The walls were lined with cracked concrete, remnants of old rail foundations, and makeshift partitions. Each tunnel was narrow, forcing the rescuers to move single file. But what they saw next made every step heavier with dread. Small, improvised rooms had been carved out of the darkness, with bedding made from tattered blankets and cardboard. Crayons, scraps of paper, and tiny toys littered the floors. It became horrifyingly clear. These spaces had been lived in, not just occasionally, but consistently, by children who had no idea the world above still existed. As they moved further, officers found evidence of meticulous planning. Each hidden room had storage areas for food and water, stacks of canned goods carefully labeled, and even rudimentary sleeping arrangements that suggested the children had been moved from room to room. Some tunnels had old, rusted locks and traps to prevent accidental discovery, and it became obvious that whoever had designed this underground maze had spent years perfecting it. The level of preparation was chilling. This was not the work of a desperate person acting in the moment, but a calculated, methodical plan to isolate these children from the world. The tunnels were eerily quiet, except for the occasional scurry of rats or the dripping of water from cracks in the ceiling. Yet the silence was broken by faint noises, the soft rustle of fabric, the distant whispers of frightened voices. The rescuers paused, listening carefully, realizing that the children were close, but terrified of their own shadows. Some rooms contained small makeshift drawings, maps scratched onto walls, and tiny handprints fading in dust, all signs of children trying to leave traces of themselves, trying to mark their existence in a place designed to erase it. The air in the tunnels was heavy and musty, thick with dust and the faint, lingering smell of old food and mold. As the team advanced, their flashlights revealed deeper passages, some partially collapsed, others leading to corners that seemed endless. Each discovery brought a mix of hope and terror, hope that they would finally reach the children, terror at imagining the years of fear and neglect these kids had endured. With every step, it became undeniable. The rail yard's forgotten underground world was a hidden kingdom of shadows, a carefully constructed prison, and the next turn might bring them face to face with the lives they had been desperate to protect. The first glimpse of the children hit the rescuers like a punch to the gut. Huddled in the corner of a dimly lit tunnel, they were small, trembling figures, their clothes torn and filthy, faces streaked with dirt and tears. The youngest clung to the oldest as if their tiny lives depended entirely on each other, which, in many ways, they did. For a moment, the rescuers simply froze, taking in the full horror of what had been hidden beneath the abandoned rail yard for months, possibly even years. These weren't just missing kids. They were living, breathing victims of a shadowed nightmare. Many of the children were too scared to speak. Their eyes, wide and haunted, darted between the officers and the dark corners of their world, as if fearing that the keeper might appear at any second. Some whispered their names in tiny voices, others hid behind scraps of clothing, and a few simply sat in silence, rocking back and forth. It was clear that trust had been eroded long before the rescuers arrived. Every comforting word, every gentle gesture was met with hesitation and suspicion. The officers realized that this rescue wasn't just about getting them out, it was about earning their confidence in a world they had never truly known. As they guided the children from the rooms and tunnels, officers saw evidence of how these kids had survived. Makeshift bedding, carefully rationed food, and small toys crafted from scraps of the yard indicated remarkable resilience in the face of unimaginable fear. Some children had left notes, scribbled maps, or tiny markers to help them navigate the tunnels, proof that they had adapted to the maze as best they could. Each child carried a story of endurance, and the rescuers could only imagine the months or years spent in isolation, hidden from the outside world, forced to rely on each other for comfort and courage. The rescuers began separating the children into small groups, speaking softly, offering food and water, and reassuring them that they were safe now. Slowly, tiny hands reached out, faces relaxed for the first time in what felt like forever. The sounds of crying and laughter intertwined as the children realized they weren't alone, that adults outside this underground prison were here to help them. It was a delicate process, fraught with tension. One wrong move could send a terrified child scuttling back into the shadows, deepening the fear that had been carefully cultivated over months by the person who had trapped them. Yet even in their fear, the children's resilience shone through. Small acts of bravery emerged, a child offering a water bottle to a younger companion, a whispered word of encouragement to someone too scared to move. These tiny gestures revealed the humanity that had survived despite the darkness and neglect. For the officers, each child rescued became a symbol of hope, but also a reminder of the cruelty that had gone unnoticed for so long. The realization that 112 children had been living in these hidden tunnels, surviving day by day, made the rail yard feel both monumental and monstrous, a place of shadows and secrets that would haunt the rescuers long after the last child was carried into safety. As investigators began piecing together the mystery of the hidden rail yard, one name kept appearing in old reports: the keeper. Locals remembered him as a reclusive rail yard worker who had vanished years ago after bitter disputes with the town over safety violations and unpaid wages. He had always been seen as strange, someone who avoided company and spent his time sketching maps of the yard and tinkering with machinery long after his shift ended. But the deeper authorities dug, the more terrifying the picture became. This was not a man who vanished by accident. He had created a fortress, a carefully constructed underground world where he could control life and death on his terms. Evidence collected from the tunnels revealed that the keeper had an almost obsessive attention to detail. Each trap, each hidden door, and every small storage area suggested someone meticulous and patient, capable of planning for months, if not years. Notes were found carved into the walls, written in a cryptic code, detailing schedules, rationing plans, and rules for the children. It became horrifyingly clear that these kids weren't just being hidden. They were being monitored, their every movement calculated to maintain control. The keeper had built a world where fear was currency, and obedience was survival. Accounts from the rescued children painted a chilling picture of his presence. While they rarely saw him, the fear of encountering him was constant. They whispered about a shadowy figure who would appear silently, moving through the tunnels like a ghost, always watching, always listening. Some described his voice, soft but commanding, issuing orders that kept them in line and prevented them from escaping. Even the bravest children spoke of nightmares, imagining him lurking in the darkness, and it became clear to the rescuers that psychological control had been as powerful a tool as the physical maze itself. Investigators also uncovered evidence suggesting the keeper had studied human behavior extensively. The layout of the tunnels was not random. Certain passages led to dead ends, while others allowed for controlled movement, as if he wanted the children to feel hope and then lose it again. Supplies were distributed sparingly, carefully calculated to ensure survival but also dependence. The walls were scrawled with rules and warnings, creating an invisible hierarchy that maintained his authority even when he was nowhere to be seen. The deeper the authorities delved into his history, the more they realized the keeper was not just a criminal. He was a mastermind, a shadow living in plain sight, blending into the abandoned world above while orchestrating a hidden reality below. Police sketches based on old photos and witness descriptions showed a man who appeared ordinary, almost unremarkable, but the evidence he left behind told a story of darkness and control beyond comprehension. The realization sent shivers through the team. This wasn't a simple rescue operation. They were dismantling the world of a predator who had been hiding in the shadows for years, and every step forward brought them closer to confronting the legacy of terror he had left behind. The moment the decision was made to move in and rescue the children, the tension in the air was almost tangible. SWAT teams, firefighters, and child protection agents coordinated in hushed tones, aware that every second counted and every wrong step could trigger disaster. The tunnels beneath the rail yard were narrow, twisted, and unstable, and the rescuers knew that the structural integrity of the hidden rooms could fail at any moment. Flashlights cut through the thick darkness as the team moved carefully, communicating through radios and hand signals to avoid startling the children hidden just ahead. Navigating the maze of tunnels proved more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Rusted metal beams threatened to collapse, puddles of stagnant water concealed deep holes, and the faint smell of decay hung heavy in the air. At several points, rescuers had to carefully remove debris to create paths, praying that the unstable floors wouldn't give way. Every step echoed ominously, a constant reminder that they were not just rescuing children. They were threading through a labyrinth of fear and danger meticulously crafted to trap anyone who dared enter. The first encounters with the children were heart-wrenching. Some were too scared to move, trembling behind makeshift walls or clinging to one another in the darkness. Rescuers spoke softly, coaxing them with promises of safety and comfort, offering water and blankets. Slowly, one by one, tiny hands reached out, hesitant but yearning for connection. Officers carried the youngest, while older children were guided along the narrow passages. Every movement was careful, deliberate. A single mistake could send the children panicking deeper into the maze, undoing hours of painstaking progress. As the operation progressed, tension spiked with each discovery of hidden rooms. Some tunnels contained children who had been too afraid to come forward, while others revealed stockpiles of supplies that had kept them alive. Rescuers discovered makeshift barricades, booby-trapped passageways, and even notes from the keeper warning of consequences for anyone attempting escape. The team worked methodically, marking cleared areas, ensuring the children stayed together, and constantly scanning for potential hazards. It was a delicate dance of urgency and precision, where every decision carried the weight of life or death. Outside, the world watched in anticipation, unaware of the danger unfolding beneath the rail yard. Families who had reported their children missing years ago waited with bated breath, unaware of how close their loved ones were to being found. For the rescuers, the stakes were higher than ever, not just to save the children physically, but to preserve their fragile trust, to lead them from darkness into safety without triggering fear that could overwhelm them. With every child carried out of the tunnels, the tension eased slightly, but the shadows of the underground world lingered, a reminder of the nightmare they had all survived and the careful planning that had kept them hidden for so long. Once the last child was guided out of the tunnels, the rail yard, long silent, seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging the secret it had held for so long. Authorities set up temporary shelters and medical stations, where the rescued children received immediate care, food, and clothing. Their parents and families were contacted, and emotional reunions unfolded under the watchful eyes of social workers and law enforcement. Yet, even amidst the relief, there was an unsettling quiet, a sense that the story was far from over. Questions swirled in the air like the lingering fog that had shrouded the yard for decades. Investigators pored over missing persons records, slowly connecting the dots. Dozens of unresolved cases from the surrounding counties suddenly made sense. Children who had vanished without a trace over the years were now accounted for, but the full scope of the keeper's operation was still unclear. How had he avoided detection for so long? How many adults had unknowingly crossed paths with him? Every answer seemed to lead to more questions, and the town, once quiet and complacent, now trembled under the realization that such horrors had existed in plain sight. The rescued children were slowly acclimating to life above ground, but the psychological scars ran deep. Nightmares, anxiety, and fear of being hidden again haunted them. Therapists and social workers documented each case carefully, knowing that recovery would be long and painstaking. Some children struggled to trust adults, others had trouble accepting food, clothing, or comfort, as if instinct still told them to survive in the shadows. The rail yard might have been cleared, but the trauma it had fostered lingered like an invisible maze in their minds. Meanwhile, the abandoned rail yard became a national story. News crews and investigators flooded the town, capturing images of rusted tracks, collapsed cars, and tunnels that had once hidden unspeakable secrets. Yet, even with cameras and reporters present, much of the underground network remained off-limits, dangerous, and inaccessible. It was a place frozen in time, a monument to fear and secrecy that could never be fully understood. People debated how something so monumental could remain hidden for so long, and the town collectively shuddered at the thought of what might still lie undiscovered in other forgotten corners of America. The shadow of the keeper loomed large, even in his absence. Authorities continued to piece together his history, trying to understand what drove a man to orchestrate such an elaborate, terrifying operation. He was gone, but the tunnels he had built, the children he had hidden, and the fear he had imposed were indelible. As the town and the nation tried to process the events, questions remained. Could this have been prevented? Were there signs overlooked? And, most hauntingly, how many other shadows in the forgotten corners of the country were waiting, silently, for discovery? As the sun set over the abandoned rail yard, casting long shadows across rusted tracks and broken cars, one thing became painfully clear. The darkness that hid the children for so long was not just in the tunnels, but in the secrets we choose to ignore. The 112 kids had been rescued, yes, but their story is a warning. Sometimes, the places we overlook, the whispers we dismiss, hold horrors beyond imagination. And while the children now walk in the light, the echoes of the past remain, haunting the empty rail yard and reminding us that vigilance is not optional. Somewhere out there, in the forgotten corners of towns like this, shadows linger, and the next tragedy could be waiting quietly, unseen, in plain sight. We rescued the children, but we cannot forget them, and we must never forget the lessons their ordeal teaches us about fear, neglect, and the darkness that hides behind ordinary doors. Because sometimes, the real danger isn't what we see, it's what we choose not to see.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.